Sim. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Coimbra Group of Brazilian University's GCUB third webinar. My name is Rosana, and I am the Executive Director of GCUB. First of all, I would like to express our sincere gratitude for our three international speakers. Dr. Matsumai from Kyushu University, Japan, Dr. Seshaiyer from George Mason University, United States, Dr. Wylie from University of Stirling, United Kingdom, and the Rector Smaili from the Federal University of São Paulo, who you moderated this webinar. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I also would like to thank all the present participants. As you know, the pandemic had a great impact on international university cooperation, and it caused a big disturbance in academic mobility program for undergraduate and graduate students, but also for researchers and professors. In this context, we must reflect deeply on new strategies for the higher education and international universities collaboration. To tackle with these issues, on the 5 continents, teaching activities were rearranged and adapted to remote classroom models. However, joint research involving international partnerships has suffered a strong impact and continues to face many difficulties due to limitations imposed by travel restrictions and presential activities. The main subject of today's webinar, strategies for the development of distance joint research, will allow us to know how 3 important universities located on 3 different continents have faced this situation, and what strategies and suggestions are pointed out for continuity of joint research with international partners. So, to start our activities, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Smaili, who is full professor at the Department of Pharmacology at São Paulo Medicine School at Federal University of São Paulo, Unifesp, researching in the areas of neuroscience, neurodegeneration, and longevity. She is also a member of the Council of Science and Technology of the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovations. Besides that, she is president of the Commission for Science, Technology, and Entrepreneurship of the National Association of Directors of Federal Higher Education Institutions in Brazil, ANDIFES. Since 2013, she is director of the Federal University of São Paulo. Rector Smaili, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Rosana, Professor Rosana Souza e Silva, our Executive Director of the Coimbra Group of Brazilian Universities, which I have the pleasure and the honor to be part of. So our group is a very active group and responsible to gather many universities in Brazil and abroad, and doing a lot of work about the sharing and the challenge that we have in science and in our universities all over the world, and especially in Brazil and in South America. Today we have the pleasure to have three speakers and the honor to have all of them from different parts of our world and talking about the strategies for the development of joint distance research. We will have first, in the first speaker, will be Dr. Wylie, Dr. Neville Wylie, who is the professor of international history and deputy principal for internationalization at the University of Stirling, Scotland, where he provides strategic leadership of all aspects of university's global engagement. He is also currently a chair of the UUKI Latin America Network. He's a native of Edinburgh, and Professor Wylie graduated with a first-class degree in medieval and modern history from King's College London. He was also a fellow at the University of Cambridge and also junior research fellowship at Newhall College. So he has a big work and a lot of work in several areas, including global engagement and responsibilities for the Americas. And he's also know very much our country, Brazil, and also has children that were born in Brazil. So this is very good to have you here, Dr. Wylie. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and it will be a great pleasure to listen to your talk, and then we will have a bit of discussion between all of us. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Soraya, thank you very much for that. It is a great pleasure to be engaging with the Coimbra group of Brazilian universities. I have lots of connections and experiences with many of the members already, and it's always a pleasure to engage with Brazilian partners. I'm just going to share my screen, if I may, and get up my presentation. I hope that is slideshow. Right, there we go. So look, thank you very much. I mean, over the next 15-20 minutes, I wanted to say something obviously on the theme of strategies for development of joint distance research. I should say that I'm just Vice Rector for internationalization, so I'm not an expert on research per se, but I am, as Professor Seshaiyer mentioned, responsible for, in a sense, ensuring that our research engagements with our global partners continue under sort of lockdown conditions and in distance conditions. I'm also, as Professor Soraya mentioned, the chair of a Latin American group of universities from the Universities UK International that are engaging with Latin America, so can speak for the sort of wider sector. I want to sort of start really by thinking about the context, and as Professor Hosanna mentioned, of course, the drivers for developing strategies for distance research are principally from the experience we are currently all involved in with the coronavirus, the COVID-19, with the lockdown. We've had travel restrictions, huge travel costs and financial costs associated with travel, not to mention health costs. And that has spurred, obviously, a drive for changing the way we do research and changing the way we engage with our international partners. That's been supported, obviously, by funding made available from international bodies, the World Health Organization and in our case, still in Britain, the European Union. But in Britain's case, we've got the UK Research Innovation team, and they started by having bilateral agreements with China and Israel, but then latterly enabled all British universities to collaborate internationally on COVID-related research, irrespective of where our partners were found. And I know that there's been a lot of work between British universities and Brazilian universities on all aspects of COVID, so not just the science and immunology and so forth, but also on the social science side, the public health and so forth. And that's been funded by Brazilian sources, but also UK and international. So that's prompted us, and an awful lot of this obviously has been driven under distance research conditions. So this has been done virtually as opposed to face to face. But it's worth remembering though, and can I just, I think if I can just stop there, because I believe that I've got the wrong panel up. Okay, let's just work ahead on this. Sorry. But we also have, other pressures at work here. It's not just COVID that is encouraging us to think about distance research. There's the climate emergency as well. And that's really very important that we take into consideration. These are pressures that will not go away. COVID, we will recover in a year, 2 years' time, but the climate emergency will not. And it's very important, therefore, that we think about how we conduct our business in terms of student recruitment, in terms of mobility, but also obviously in terms of our research. We've got to get away from constantly getting on planes to do conferences and so forth. So these are really important issues. We've got to think really not so much about a recovery from COVID, but we've got to think about resetting the way we operate. Now, there's no doubt that the COVID and the climate emergency are likely to have a significant and prolonged impact on the way that research will be conducted internationally. There's no doubt also that to some extent the context is more benign for us on all sides, less so in certain national contexts than others, I must admit. But there's clearly a much greater public awareness of the importance of science. In my country, I think we have suffered to some extent from a reluctance to accept the importance of science and evidence-based policy making. That has shifted quite significantly over the last 4 or 5 months, and we've been treated by scenes of what is commonly known as Boris and the Boffins. So that's Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, flanked by the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Officer of the UK. And scientists and the research community are therefore speaking directly to the public and influencing, not leading, but certainly informing policy in a way that we really haven't seen for many years, certainly for the last 3 or 4 years. So we may see a return to the age of the expert in a way that we might have feared that we'd lost it earlier. So there's certain things that are positive about the environment that we're trying to build distance research into. But at the same time, we've got to remember that we are all going to be facing huge financial problems within our own national economies. So the hole in the public finances will mean that funding for research, it's already tight in many places, no less than in Brazil. But the impact of COVID just on the national finances is going to be such that we are likely to see a retrenchment, both in terms of the full amount of funding funding for science, but also potentially a refocusing of research funding to national priorities rather than global or international. Certainly in the UK, for the last 10 years, we've benefited enormously from funding that has been focused on internationalizing our research. We're hoping that that will continue, but given the financial problems and the recession or depression we will encounter in the UK economy, we may well find that model under pressure. Likewise, the British university sector is very dependent on international student fees. That is coming under enormous pressure, and so our ability to cross-subsidize research with our international partners through international student fees is under pressure. And to some extent, there's a danger also of a sort of nationalization of research. Although COVID research has been enormously benefited enormously from the internationalization, so cooperation between different researchers, a lot of it has been framed internally as a national effort. So I think we have to be wary of that agenda, of that narrative domestically. Distance research, therefore, may be a set of practical problems for us, but other agencies may well see it as a way of doing the research on a tighter shoestring, so for less money. So these are the kind of competing pressures that we'll be working under. Now, we've seen, as a remarkable level of collaboration. However, an awful lot of that collaboration, I think, has been right up until sort of April, May, quite nationally focused. And to some extent, notwithstanding the contribution that many universities, particularly in Brazil, have made, what worries me is the focus that the research has had on certain key national and national academies, and also national universities. So I just come out of here. Sorry, can I just pause and get my slides up? Okay, apologies, these are a little bit earlier set. So thinking through what the challenges will be. Okay, look, I'm sorry, if you just give me 1 second, I just need to get the latest version up. Okay. So look, there's some challenges we're gonna encounter, I think, for research under distance conditions, and the first one is very clear, that the impact that our researchers have had in trying to work from lockdown conditions has had a huge impact on a gender aspect. We've seen, as the current slide shows, a real decline in the female first authoring of papers. So this is something that we're going to have to take very seriously in thinking about collaborating internationally. Are we getting our internal mechanisms in place to ensure that the impact of our research is not being disproportionate in its impact on our research community? So first authoring of female academics in the UK and elsewhere has been creeping up. It's just over a third over the last 5 years, but because of the gendered nature of the impact of COVID, we've seen our female colleagues having to take on more child caring responsibility in traditional roles, and that has had a very detrimental impact on the way in which our staff have been able to respond to COVID. The second aspect of this is on the more inequalities. And I'm really anxious here about the way in which, if we are working internationally at a distance, some of the attempts to ensure genuine equality of research opportunities and knowledge transfer that we've seen developed over the last a couple of decades may see a retreat. And what I have in mind here is that there's a really great importance that we ensure that both, as it were, north-south, but also south-south dialogues are based on genuine levels of equality. And we don't see, in a sense, a sort of extractive research that we may well encounter and having encountered in the past. So certainly in Stirling, what we're doing is emphasizing, going back to our researchers and emphasizing the importance of ensuring that the nature of their collaborations are genuinely equal with their partners. This is something that under the conditions of digital poverty, with access to online facilities, but also basically things like connectivity. A lot of researchers at the University of Stirling do research in sub-Saharan Africa, and now this is a clear disparity in terms of resource opportunities and so forth. And I just fear that if we are beginning to work remotely, that these disparities are going to be exacerbated. So if I can finish by sort of mentioning some things that we're doing in Stirling to try and develop these distance research. The first is working with parties and organizations to try and help matchmake. One of the difficulties we're going to see going forward when we're unable to travel is an inability to make connections, to meet potential researchers and go to institutions abroad. So we're going to have to work out modalities to ensure that we can continue to increase the sort of fabric of international collaboration. And I see, frankly, groups like the Coimbra Group, the British Council, in UK's case, the international, the UUK International, the Science and Innovation Network, all of whom are very present in Brazil from the UK's perspective, as being, in a sense, matchmakers or marriage brokers for British universities trying to engage with Brazilian counterparts. That's going to have to continue really very intently over the next couple of years, as we can't engage, as it were, face to face. One of the things we're doing internally, though, is redoubling our efforts to draw a sort of communities of practice with a regional focus within the institution, so that senior staff can introduce junior staff to potential collaborators in universities across the globe, because of the difficulties of getting this moving forward. A second aspect of what we're doing is rethinking the way that we value and judge an academic career. If promotions can no longer and should no longer be judged on whether colleagues are going and giving keynote addresses at the University of Sydney or the university is in the United States and Brazil, we have to think of different ways of gauging quality academic output and quality prestige and esteem factors, and we've got to be careful that the weight of research isn't pushed back to our senior researchers who already have networks in place, and that our junior researchers, our early career researchers are not lost because they have not had the opportunity to network because of the conditions that we're facing. A third aspect of what we're working on is really to emphasize the importance of connecting with partners at a research office and professional services level to balance the connections that are made with through our researchers. So often research is driven through the grassroots research, the fact that your researchers and my researchers know each other and work away. But particularly under these conditions of distance research, I think it's important that we try and connect our professional services together to help facilitate and ensure that the research is done from a basis of complete equality, that gender issues are being addressed and so forth, because these can be, as it were, ignored at the frontiers of science. Finally, what we're doing is emphasizing the importance of comparative research. When our researchers cannot join with each other and do frontier-based research, working on common problems collaboratively, when it's simply not possible to do that through distance learning and distance opportunities, we're trying to recalibrate our research to do more comparative work. So sharing methodologies, sharing research practices, and having, as it were, research done on Brazil and research done in the UK and elsewhere around the globe, and then pulling this research together. So driving forward research ideas through comparative research rather than any other ways. I will draw my conclusions to my points to an end there, and I look forward to discussing these further at the end with my other colleagues. And I'll hand the floor back to Soraya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Wylie. I had a little problem here, but that's fine. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It was very interesting, important, and we will have a little bit of discussion in the end of our section of the 3 presentations. And now I have the pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Akane Matsumai. She is joining us from Japan, which is great to have these connections. Is true that we are far and we have a lot of difficulties right now to see people presentially, but we can talk using this wonderful activity and using this technology. This is wonderful to have you here. Dr. Matsumai is an associate professor in the design faculty at Kyushu University, whose area of expertise is social creativity within creativity studies. Her current research focuses on elucidating the dynamic mechanisms of social relationships that structure a society, focusing on cognition, behavior, and the design process. She received first an ME from the Tokyo Institute of Technology, then a Juris Doctor from Kyushu University, and the PhD, where she got her PhD in Knowledge and Science from Japan Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. She's been in several institutions working, especially in Gdański Institute, University of Technology in Poland. And also she was a visiting professor as part of the EU Innovation Program, as well as a visiting scholar at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. So thank you so much, Dr. Dr. Matsumai, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Rector Smaili. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm very glad to have this opportunity to give a speech here again. Last year I was in the Amazon forest, but unfortunately this year in a very virtual forest. So today I'd like to share my screens here. Well, a moment, please. Here. Okay. Right. So today I'd like to talk about the strategy for joint distance research from the viewpoint of the dynamic relationship design. My presentation will be divided into 4 parts. First, I will give you a brief introduction of the background. And the second, I'd like to share my strategical point of view of joint research, knowledge sharing structure, and co-creation. Then the third, I'd like to introduce a small example of an actual challenge under the COVID-19 and how the distance affected on the joint research. Finally, I'll wrap up my presentation, how we can apply this knowledge to design joint research. Before I start my presentation, let me introduce myself briefly. I'm an associate professor at the Faculty of Design Kyushu, top design faculty in Japan, according to the QS World University Ranking. I have more than 20 years practical experience in social innovation design with interdisciplinary background, engineering, and law, and incoming leader of the Design Creative SIG at the Worldwide Design Society. To develop the methodology for social innovation design, our laboratory challenges those topics. The background to be focused most here is the increased necessity to adapt to VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. COVID-19 has revealed and accelerated the VUCA around the world. In other words, the necessity of dynamic relationship design has been increased to adopt VUCA design circumstances. Looking also into the exponentially increased number of research articles about co-creation, The importance of co-creation among diverse individuals and organizations is often emphasized for innovations. There are substantial studies on co-creation, however. Most of the studies focus on the value co-created. Why don't we focus on the subjectivity of the co-creation instead? Who co-creates the value? From our past case studies and practical experiences, we have learned the importance of being shown here, which has usually been overlooked. Collaborative projects often would up when a given framework is taken away, like now, for instance, becoming obsolete in dynamic circumstances like COVID-19 or the termination of the period of subsidy. Forming the dynamic and autonomous relationship is the basis of sustainable innovation. Furthermore, considering the fragile subjectivity in VUCA society, consciousness towards being, in other words, relationship become even more important for its sustainability. Value directly follows doing, but the being is the essential base of doing. Here, I'd like to introduce my first strategical points of view, KSS, to grasp and express these relationships extensively. Knowledge sharing structure is the structure how the knowledge is shared among stakeholders. From the left to the right, knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange, and knowledge co-creation. In my understanding, to say something as joint research, mere knowledge transfer or knowledge exchange is not enough, and knowledge co-creation is essentially shared at least among the core researchers along with the joint research. The second strategical point of view is co-creation. The term co-creation is widely used, however, it's not being clearly defined. And the difference among the collaboration, co-creation, and cooperation is ambiguous. Here, referring the Seki model of the knowledge creation theory, we define co-creation as the collaboration to co-create something together, sharing the phase of socialization among individuals. Here, since intersubjectivity among stakeholders is formed as the basis of the co-creation through shared experience of converting tacit knowledge to new tacit knowledge together. What are the differences between co-creation and cooperation? As you see in the left, both tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge are shared with co-creation. Sharing a clear common goal among individuals is not required at the beginning of the co-creation process because we cannot, but it appears throughout the process of co-creation, dynamically developed. On the other hand, the right one, this cooperation, distinctive from co-creation, as the collaboration to achieve the given common goal without sharing tacit knowledge among stakeholders. A given common goal must be central for cooperation from the beginning, and only explicit knowledge is shared among them. Contrary, co-creation is an inevitable gestation process to form a shared goal and relationship among them. But once they have defined themselves appropriately, cooperation could be more efficient than co-creation as long as it works. To summarize, we cannot jump from the group of the individuals to the organization. And moreover, the defined organization cannot stay static since they are also required to keep redefining to adapt this VUCA situation. Therefore, we need to consider this transitional dynamic phase, which is often overlooked, to form intersubjectivity, in other words, structure, restructure relationships with co-creativity. Here are some conceptual images to share. These slides. Oh, okay. This slide shows the individual subjectivities. As you see, these colorful circles, which represent the 5 individual subjectivities. Then organizational subjectivities. There are collective subjectivities organized which define relationships. Most common relationships such as contracted or legal subjectivities, tied statically with a given framework. They are still based on individual subjectivity though. Then here, what we call intersubjectivity is formed among individual subjectivities. From the perspective of the structuring and restructuring relationship, intersubjectivity is a relation where each individual experiences the other as a like subject and the source of motive power for execution among them. Thus, intersubjectivity is fragile and unstable basis of co-creation. It's formed among individuals, sometimes get less density, more distributed, or even broken and disappeared. So here, co-creativity is defined as a shared motivation among individuals to develop and realize their concept, to sustain the dynamic co-creative process and its unstable subjectivities. Like this. So here, although I cannot explain all factors of the co-creation mechanism today due to the time limitation, representing the findings of our previous studies, we place the key factors into a co-creation dynamic system, what we called inverted vortex model, IVM. This model indicates that individuals with various contexts form intersubjectivity through co-creation as moving object, black points in this figure, converge at the deeper point along with the fluid flow of the vortex under the appropriate conditions. Co-creation process and the individual's contexts interact with each other as a vortex and moving objects interact each other. The object converge in the vortex and occasionally breaking the vortex. The point to be emphasized here is that what comes first is not the common goal or the intersubjectivity among individuals. Although they are necessary to be originally within a certain boundary object to start co-creation, a common goal and intersubjectivity can be developed along with the co-creation. A boundary object is a sort of arrangement that allows the different groups to work together without consensus, especially in the context of collaboration infrastructure. By setting an appropriate boundary object here, research theme in the context of joint research, and then the co-creation process in the project. Different contexts of each individual can bundle and sharpened. Here, I'd like to share a tiny example, our current challenge under COVID-19 and how the distance affected on our joint research. This research project is applied the knowledge obtained from the previous studies to the vocabulary acquisition. Restructuring knowledge sharing structure can increase the contextual knowledge and its value shared among the stakeholders. As explained in the following 4 minutes video, we 3 from Japan, France, and Indonesia had to start and carry this joint research via online under the COVID-19 situation, involving examinees around the world and still keep developing in half globe distance.
Hello everyone, my name is Ferdi, a research student from Indonesia in Matsumai lab, Kyushu University. This project is a collaborative effort between me and Quentin, an exchange student from France. We both are supervised by Dr. Matsumai. Here, we would like to introduce our experiment, which was designed, prepared, and executed online under this COVID-19 situation. Quentin and I arrived in Japan in March, and basically we have not been allowed to meet face-to-face in Kyushu University. So the three of us had to discuss, design, and develop this research online. The purpose of our research is to study how interactive process and co-creative process affect vocabulary acquisition. The experiment was carried with examinees to acquire 15 Japanese onomatopoeia words, which has 3 meanings per word. The reason we choose onomatopoeia for our experiment is that each of onomatopoeia word holds a certain tacit concept, which is important to be shared within the co-creative process, and that it is independent from the cultural context and language structures, assuming we would have international participants. We started with manual recruitment via friends, chat groups, or communities, and decided later to try using social media for recruitment because of the time limitation. We did it through Gengoya, an Indonesian-based social media account for Japanese learners. We had a good base of people who are interested in a topic. So we had an extra English interview in advance to make sure their skill is adequate. We managed to gather 41 examinees, which 37 actually attended and had no problem in English at all. These are some demographics of the gathered examinees. While most of the participants were from Indonesia, we are sure this experiment could be all the same wherever in the world. We had international participants, as you see, and had an application from Brazil and USA after we closed the call. We had to close the registration due to time limitation caused by our late start of recruitment. Here is our video call schedule during the experiment week, which was pretty busy considering the time difference. For each session, we had a maximum 3 people, which were gathered in one Zoom conference room for the briefing. Examinees are then separated into their own rooms to carry the experiment. This means we had 3 computers, one for each examinee, to share their screen and start recording. Their activities are separated into 2 learning methods and quizzes. There were 3 learning methods: A, standard, where everything is shown and examinees are only required to retype the bold part of the example sentence. Method B, interactive, where example sentence can be shown or hidden, and examinees are required to retype the bold part of example sentence. And method C, co-creative, where examinees are required to create a sentence, then are responded with sentence from our side, then create another sentence as if they are co-creating a sentence. Examinees are given a quiz for each method, plus 1 retention quiz at the end, which is to recall all of the words learned. The quizzes are created with Google Forms and divided into 4 types of quiz to test their vocabulary acquisition. In the end, examinees are given an overall questionnaire of the experiment to know more about their opinions. The most important data that we collected was the Zoom video recording data and their quiz results. With the permission from each of the examinees, we were able to record their screen and their face and are able to recall everything that happened during the experiment. This was really important because we spent a lot of time rewatching the video and managed to find very specific things, like how they try our learning materials and quizzes, or know exactly how long they answer each question by the second. We will keep developing our research until we publish this work. Although Quentin has left Japan and returned to his homeland, France, everything will progress the same as we have been doing so far, in spite of our half-globe distance between France and Japan. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So finally, let me wrap up my presentation. By choosing the knowledge sharing structure to set, cooperation or co-creation, we can dynamically design and direct the relationship as expected, according to the phase of the project and depending on the individual involved. When we direct the co-creation, not only about the joint research, but even larger scale of co-creation, we can keep this IBM inverted vortex model in our mind. What kind of context does each of stakeholders hold? What kind of and how large boundary objects should be set? Is it the time to divide or merge the vortex, or the time to accelerate co-creation, or more sticky one? Or is it the time to fix the vortex into defined cooperative relationship, and so on? Among whom, when, and what kind of relationships do we like to structure? We have to admit that sharing experiences and converting tacit knowledge among individuals is difficult in distance, although the socialization is the essential process for co-creation as explained. Therefore, our efforts should be consciously made to manage it, whether we pursue it or find the alternatives. I hope the following references could be any help to cover where I skipped during my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matsumai. It was a brilliant presentation, very interesting work, and experience that we will talk a little bit more in the end of the presentations. So now I have to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Seshaiyer. He is a tenure full professor and the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at George Mason University. His experience is in the broad areas of computational mathematics, scientific computing, designing thinking, systems thinking, and STEM education. During the last decade, Dr. Seshaiyer initiated and directed a variety of educational programs, including graduate and undergraduate research, K-12 outreach, teaching, professional development, and enrichment programs to foster the interest of students and teachers in STEM at all levels. So his work now is dealing a lot with the predicting the dynamics of the infectious disease such as COVID-19 and its impact on virtual learning, as well as the development of innovative and integrated pedagogical and research practices. In 2019, he was selected as Figures That Matters and was awarded as a honorary doctorate from Vrije University, Brussels, for being a committed scientist who transcended the boundaries of their disciplines and to personalities that have been at the frontiers of societal changes. Thank you, Dr. Seshaiyer. It's a great pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Smaili. I hope you can hear me. And
Yes.
Let me try to share my screen. Share screen. Give me a second. Okay. Okay, I hope you can see my screen right now. Is that good? We good?
Yes.
Okay, so it's wonderful to be a part of this. Thank you, Rasana, and thank you for invitation to this wonderful panel. I enjoyed listening to the first two speakers from completely different parts of the world who brought different perspectives, both in terms of the process and the design of how one can actually do distance research. And I hope to also bring some diverse perspectives from what can actually go into the research in terms of personally what I conduct in terms of working with my collaborators all across the world. And the pictures that you see here in the front slide kind of gives you for some of the research that I'm engaged in, and how this is not placed in the United States, but it's placed in countries like in Africa, to countries in Asia, and so on. And as was introduced, my focus as I evolved from being a student to finishing my PhD to going towards assistant professorship, associate professorship, and then full professorship, and then going towards administration also as well. The way I've actually worked has changed. Research has definitely given a completely new meaning to what I do. Even though I was formally trained as a mathematician, I also have a background in engineering. So I've always been trying to put these things together and in a meaningful way. And it took me some years to figure out what meaningful really meant. And until I started to learn about some frameworks, which I'm going to share today, which I was able to bring into research. And that helped me to work with different stakeholders, including students at all levels, including teachers, including ministries at different levels, and helping them advise on everything from curriculum to science and technology, as well as funding organizations. So I work as a program director at the National Science Foundation in the United States, which is very similar to many of the funding organizations in different countries for science. So research, of course, is a very important aspect in an academic career. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle, So you want to put it along with so many other things that you do, like teaching. You do some community service, and you do some outreach, and so. But in that, you want to place yourself as a researcher as well. And within the research, there's a lot of steps, as you all know. And what qualifies to be distance research makes it even more interesting. And everything that you have probably done pre-COVID in terms of what's your short-term goal and long-term goal has now probably changed big time. And then, of course, it all depends on what your strength is and how you actually want to think about the research. I just wanted to double check. I thought I saw a chat. I just wanted to make sure that you're still able to hear me. And are we good there? Can I continue? Can I?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. I just wanted to
Yes.
make sure. I'm not watching the chat. So, okay. So, as I was saying, so essentially, research is a multi-stage process, and it starts off with knowledge. So if I ask my students or my fellow colleagues, what do you see? Typically, they say, I see dots, or I see colored dots, and that, and colored dots that are all separated. But then when you start connecting these dots, that is where you bring your research experience and start to make connections like a network, or these are cities connected by roads, or so you start to make sense of it, and that's where you start to put your experience. But then research can actually go to the next level if you are a little more creative and actually see the cat, right? So, and it's very important to actually have as you go through research, not everybody can see the cat, and but it requires creativity. This is a big part of what being a researcher is all about. And then ideation, very, very important. Ideas that could doesn't mean that you will get the breakthrough result, but it also could mean that you can fail, and then from failure you get up and then try again. And so that's the beauty of research. And as everybody knows, Edison, most people think of him for finding that bulb, but many people don't realize he failed 9,999 times before he found the bulb. So it's very important to understand that research comes with failure, and failure is the pathway to success in research. And there's nothing, I would say, nothing in comparison to what we are in right now. Everything that we thought was very successful in research, COVID has given us a completely new meaning, right? So, and it's redefined what we do. So if I have to define what we need for being a good ideation for in research, if I were to give you 30 circles, I'm not going to do this exercise, and if I say fill this 30 exercise, I give this to all my students and faculty. I say fill it with as many ideas as possible, research ideas, whatever ideas. Usually many of them struggle because they are going to not know what my question even means. And so, but people that are very creative, or people that have these qualities that I'm going to show you, that are fluent, for example, then can immediately fill it up with smiley face, angry face, sad face. I mean, we use our cell phones and we use emoticons all the time. But when I ask that question, most people have a hard time actually telling me immediately the answer. Why? Because they're focused on one thing or certain things they know. So when you extend their imagination, it's hard for them to understand that being fluent in research is very, very important. The second thing is being flexible in research, especially in distance research. These two qualities are super important. So 2 F words for the day for you: fluency and flexibility. Okay, so you have to have that, especially in times of COVID. It's very, very important. And the third F word, I already talked about an F word, which was failure, fluency, flexibility. One more F word, one of the most important thing is funding, right? So without funding, it's actually sometimes very hard to do research, and you're still sitting at home. You're still wondering whether I can do the same exact type of research. And I'm very fortunate to have been funded by many organizations over the past several years, which has helped me to do a lot of research, especially one, National Science Foundation partnered with the USAID. I don't have the picture there, but I was able to work with all the way across in Tanzania through a grant called PEER, Partnership for Enhanced Engagement in Research. And this allowed me to actually work with the principal investigator on, in another continent, in another developing country. And we were able to come up with thematic ideas that solves local problems, local challenges, and helps give masters and PhDs to students in the country. That was the whole grant about. And so what was fascinating about this was from the background that I had in mathematics, in scientific computing, in engineering, I was really, only introduced to the world of computers and simulation and things like that in the United States. But when I started applying that to problems in Africa, for example, in Tanzania, it started to become actual master's and PhD thesis for the students. At the same time, I was very happy that the techniques that we develop can be applied to a completely different setup. So I think this idea of, to me, this is distance research as well. And of course, there are challenges right now, but I'm still able to communicate with these students that I would meet just like this. I never, have been there more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time, but most of the time we were connected through internet. And I'm very happy to tell you I have 2 PhD students and 4 master's students, all graduated through the internet. So that tells you pre-COVID how we have been working, and nothing has changed post-COVID as well, okay, or current COVID also. So if I were to think about in my head as a academician and research, I can classify research into computational research, theoretical research, experimental research, and educational research. I kind of delve into all, I've delved into all of them, but what I'm not really good at is experimental research. I do know how to do a computational research. I do know how to do theoretical research, and I'm fairly, aware of educational research. But experimental research is not something that I'm an expert at. And so it is also important for people not to claim that you're good in everything. Okay, so that's one of the fundamental things in research. And so my goal has always been to take a physical system. It could be COVID, it could be infectious diseases, coming up with a model, typically a mathematical model, and then trying to find textbook solutions. If you don't have textbook solutions, then you try to find numerical or computational solutions. If you can, of course, one is computation, one is more on theory, but then without experimentalists giving you data, your research is not complete. That's what that picture actually signifies. And yes, I do work in the area of infectious diseases, which is modeled after very prominent, what are called as compartmental models. People are susceptible to a disease, that's the S. They get infected, that's the I. And then they go to the doctor and they get recovered. But in things like COVID, you can get exposed and you can be asymptomatic. So these models get enhanced. These models become differential equations or some type of equations. Those equations can be simulated and then they can be learned from that. What do I mean by that? You can find things like theoretical answers like basic reproduction number that you all see. Then you can learn from it. This is where you take it into the next level, like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and learn and predict what happens later. So this is the kind of the area that I work on. And in terms of COVID, I currently am working on a project. For example, what happens when airplane travel resumes? Well, are you going to walk into a plane and sit next to a person who is not wearing face mask and start to cough? What happens is when the cough comes out, the droplets will start to move, and there's the AC that is going to push the droplet towards you. So the droplet is actually moving, and the concentration of the droplet can be modeled. And the AC that is pushing it can be modeled. That's the fluid that is trying to push. Now the droplet comes and falls, let's say, on your face, and then you start to ingest some kind of a disease, and you're susceptible, and now an epidemiological model starts. Now you walk away from the airplane with a disease and you have an airborne infection. So, and then you learn from it. And so this is the one of the projects that I'm doing, just to give you an idea of how you can actually bring computational research into real practical setup. And then we also make models with which expands the idea of compartmental models. Quarantine, you got to add that compartment. Severe patients, you got to add that compartment. And then all that is great, but my big message is all models are wrong, but some models are more wrong than the others. Okay, so which means you can try to figure out what models work and what models don't work. For example, you could do all sorts of modeling, scientific, mathematical, all experimental. You cannot change behavior of people. So you got to account for behavior of people also. So that's not something that, so this is a great way to think about adding that into research. Educational research. I enjoy working on understanding why frameworks work, why several frameworks are much more interesting, why are they much more meaningful, helpful, and so on. So that ranges from experiential learning to inquiry-based learning to challenge-based learning to project-based learning to active learning to learning by doing. So I try to understand why things are working, why does it impact certain groups of people much more than, and why are we not using these as teachers in the classroom? So this is something that is very impactful, and I've learned that. And then the third thing I've learned is if you don't take those things to the policy, to the congressmen and the people that are sitting in these administrative, like the White House and so on, unless they hear what the importance of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all these things is, then sometimes whatever you're doing is just not really projected outside. So I make it a point that my students will reach out to all these senators and so on and say why their research is important, and many faculty forget to do that. So this is very, very important. It's a phone call or it's a email to say, hey, I'm working on COVID. What is your current policy? Or at least to say that you're working on it, because those guys need to know about this. It doesn't matter if it is in Brazil's president or they need to know, or a US president of ministry, they need to know what type of projects that faculty are working on that can help them craft their policy. So one of the things I feel in research, we are too much focused on the content of the research, but it's very important to also think about what competencies that we can actually create for the students. So for example, yes, content in biology, content in mathematics, content in social sciences is very important, but also what competencies can that research build? And that's very, very important, because at the end of the day, they are going to be, or not all of them will go into research in academics. Some of them will go into industry. Some of them will go into other professional organizations. So they need to know, in one organization, writing may be more important. In one organization, something else is more important. Science communication is more important. In academics, maybe teaching is more important, and along with the research. So it's very important to not just train students just on just your research, but also on everything else, all the transferable skills, problem solving, digital and data literacy, 21st century skills, communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. All these are very important. Ethics, implicit bias. I love the fact that Neville said something about how women are affected more during this COVID in terms of the first author. People don't think about those things, and it's very, very important, I think. I think so. There are lots of organizations that actually have provided us to identify these problems. Where are these problems coming from? For example, the National Science Foundation in the United States has identified 10 big ideas. 6 of them are research ideas and 4 of them are process ideas. Where should we put the money in? Well, problems that involve data, harnessing data, problems that involve, for example, the human frontiers in technology, problems that involve rules of life, that means biology and mathematical biology, for example, problems that involve, for example, quantum. So there are these focus areas. So when we are thinking of research, this distance research gives us an opportunity to change our areas or adapt what we are doing. So it's very important for researchers to not just silo themselves into, this is what I know, this is what I will do. You got to use this opportunity to actually, what I call as forced entrepreneurship. Just change directions. This is the chance for you to do that. Then there is also the National Academy of Sciences, which has put engineering challenges, 14 grand challenges, for example, making solar energy economical, manage nitrogen cycle. What was interesting is anybody can sit together and make these challenges, in a few minutes. But what was interesting is the program that they came up with after that. They said students that are able to do research in this, students that are able to do a global aspect on each of those things, students that are able to do service learning, students that are able to do interdisciplinary work, and students that are able to do entrepreneurship will actually be awarded something like a National Academy Grants Challenge Scholar. I thought that part of the program was very, very important to create this next generation of researchers. So there are frameworks out there. Now, the frameworks that I like to work with brings in collaboration, very, very important aspect of it. And these are personal problems to me, which I've worked on. Why is it very personal? Because this motivates another framework, which I enjoy a lot working on. And this, as a mathematician and a scientist and an engineer, I have really grown to enjoy matching the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to real problems. So a child having cancer and trying to go inside an MRI room and they are not able to do it. How do you make them actually enjoy the experience? Or gang violence in Puerto Rico, or killing elephants, for their tusks, and so that's a peace and justice goal. Or health and well-being, Zika, or COVID, and so on. Even the students on the top right, are bored with education, virtual education, online education. So how do you bring that into quality education? Goal number, one of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a great framework. So I urge faculty all across the world and to think about diversifying your research to adapt to these goals, because that's actually very, very useful. And if you ask, like, okay, I'm a math education person or I'm a science education person, I don't know how to adapt myself to the goal. Well, if you look at goal number 4, that's quality education. How about you can actually think about what is inquiry-based learning, what is collaborative learning, how do you actually learning by doing, and that's adapted to the quality education. Again, there are so many ways you can engage students. If you were to think about programs for women, for example, and if you want to champion something, you could do lots of things online. Then you're hitting another framework, gender equality. So if you're addressing that first author issue that Neville talked about, then you're actually really contributing to gender equality. So this is the type of thing. So faculty don't make those connections straight to the goals. And personal problem for me is why are these poor animals being killed for example, the rhino horn is $1.5 million in the black market, so why they are being killed. So the question is, how can we stop it? And so what do you do to do these things? So with sustainable development goals, another big framework I end up using is called design thinking. Design thinking is this 5-step process, for example, which starts with empathy, needs assessment, understanding what the needs are for research, for example. And then we define all the challenges. For example, for this poaching problem of killing elephants, the empathy is asking people the questions about poaching and the right questions to the right people. And then you are asking questions like, and then you're defining problems. Who are the poachers? Where are the poachers? When are they attacking the elephants? And how are they attacking the elephants? And so on. And then you go after one of the questions. And then you try to ideate solutions. That's step number 3. You ideate different types of solutions. And then once you have a solution, then you prototype it. And then you test it. And that's the idea for design thinking. Now, how about we mix? So I've been noticing not many people are working in bringing design and sustainable development goals together. I would love, I'm already writing several papers on it. If anybody is interested, I'm totally, excited to partner and work on something that brings design thinking and sustainable goals together to solve grand challenges. So, and there are so many great problems that you can solve if you were to think of this. And the prototype that we came up with was a drone. And of course, I have to teach students about what a drone is and how to build a drone and things like that. Well, this is exactly where simple exercises help, is building drones with simple sticks and things like that first to explain the concept of a drone, and then build a real drone with 3D printers and things like that. So there is opportunity to teach experiential learning also there. And then, of course, I talked to you about how do you get children excited so that they will, cancer children who get into the MRI machine. Well, maybe you should change the experience in the room. And this is where design thinking helps. What if you make the room a fun place for the children to go? There's research behind that. Modeling spread of diseases. As I said, there's many models that actually help you to understand how to model from susceptible to infected to recovered. Add a mosquito in the picture, then you start talking about chikungunya, dengue, and all these research can be done at home. You can come up with good models, but then you have to understand and you can expand these models. For example, can I use the same idea, and we did, and we already have with this published with students, is can I use the same idea to understand gang violence in Puerto Rico? Sure. We thought about the gang leaders as mosquitoes, and we thought about the people that are infected as regular people, and we started talking about interaction just like Zika type interaction, but we adapted it to another research. So it's a perfect time in distance research to adapt your research to problems that can impact the society. So this is something that I'm very personally excited about on these types of ideas. And now we are expanding these type of ideas to COVID, and social behavior becomes a very important thing. How do you model social behavior? So finally, my work is all about taking something from one area, coming up with a model, translating to a completely different area. So for example, infectious diseases to modeling violence to, for example, opioids. And once we understand something about how these models help simulate, give us insight into theory, then we can develop devices. In fact, we have a patent pending for a device and electronic device attached to a body that will tell people that came back from rehabilitation to stop taking drugs when they are triggered by certain events. Then we are able to actually put it all together and bring the entrepreneurship piece into it. So this is kind of where the world is right now. And so to finish, as scientists, we tend to be very, very inquiry based. As engineers, we are very design based. It's very important to bring inquiry-based research and design-based research together to do very successful research and distance research. What does that mean? Well, the scientist is always after the question. The engineer is always after the problem. And the scientist, is trying to research the question, while the engineer is researching the problem. And so there is fine differences between the way they work, and the same type of philosophy appeals and applies in several areas also. So it's very important to identify the strengths and weaknesses in both and try to marry these things. And this is how you get models like what Akane was talking about. And I love the fact that it was actually a bottom-up approach, the vortex model, not just top-down. Somebody's telling you, do research on this topic. They are actually coming together and figuring out how they can work together. So I think that vortex model is a very interesting idea. So to finish, we have to move away from silos, like sitting inside a room and thinking about, I only know this topic. It is time to actually change the philosophy from, here is the content I know, let me go solve the problem. That's the philosophy right now most people are following. Change that to, here is the problem, let me now use what I know to solve it. So this change the philosophy, and distance research will automatically happen. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This very interesting talk. It was wonderful to hear you, Dr. Seshaiyer. And I ask now, we will have some time for questions. We have some very interesting questions. And I ask all the speakers to open the cameras. So we will be together talking. And then we also have the possibility, we had the possibility to listen to different aspects, different views of how we are facing and dealing with research during this time. And it's a big challenge, but we have several ideas of how we can connect with each other and how we can interact and have creative processes as well. So that are aspects that are so important to continue for researchers and for development of the research in our universities and in the whole science. So I think that we can have the questions. We have some questions for all the speakers, and we will have some time of discussion now. And then in the end, we can have some final remarks from you. It will be great to listen to all of you together. So first, I want to direct the questions to Professor Wylie. We have here 2 questions. I'll have 2 of them. I will ask both together, if that's all right with you. Okay, so first one was, what are the main strategies for internationalization after the COVID-19 with the creation of the vaccine? This is one of the questions made from Claudio Carlan from Federal University of Alfenas, Minas Gerais. And the other question is, do you believe this new scene with improved cooperation among universities from distant countries? Do you believe in that new scene of cooperation? This is from Vinicius Oliveira from Federal University of Rio Grande. So please.
Am I muted? No, I've managed to sort that out. Look, thank you very much for those 2 questions on both the kind of the new environment and then in the sense of post-COVID environment. As would be very clear from kind of my presentation, I'm at the sense at the coalface, not of the academic research, which is what the other 2 panelists are, but actually trying to steer universities through this this challenging environment. And what strikes me really is how far we've come, with that challenge of COVID, and how, factual-based, knowledge-based, evidence-based research has begun, as I suggested, to be taken much more seriously. But at the same time, and it might be just because I'm sitting in the UK, although frankly, the challenges, I think, as academics and as an academic sector, and as people who are driven by evidence-based analysis, I suspect the challenges in the context are pretty similar in the United States and in Brazil as they are here, given the political environment that we're all frankly suffering from. But what strikes me is how, to some extent, universities were part of the problem, were perceived as being part of the problem. The context that we're dealing with in the UK is a reaction to globalization. It's a reaction to internationalization and cooperation. That is what drove our departure from the European Union. It might be what will drive other kind of forms of populist behavior. Now, when I'm a historian, so I sit back and I think universities in the Cold War were able to maintain collaboration. So we did have connections across the Iron Curtain between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, between the United States, and we still we use culture, we use science, we use universities to maintain that, and it worked fine in the Cold War. The problem with the narrative that we've had just up to COVID, which was all about it's anti-science, it's anti-globalization, and we frankly ignored it in our kind of in our university bubble, is that we were part of the problem. We were perceived as being vectors of globalization and internationalization, and we've really got to take that seriously. And to some extent, the political problems that the three countries I've mentioned face, and there are others besides, are because of that. So if that's the scene, can COVID help? Can climate change help? Well, I sincerely hope so, because we at the end of the day we'll sort out COVID. I mean, I have no doubt about that. But can we solve the bigger existential issues of climate change? Well, we will not be able to do that without using the combined knowledge resource of our universities, not just those in the developed world, but also those in the developing world, right? Absolutely key. And the second thing we need to do is find out how, and this is coming to the internationalization strategies, how do we do that without exacerbating the very problems that we're trying to deal with? And to be honest, I think that we were very good as universities and as scholars at saying we've got answers to these solutions, climate change and so forth. What we weren't particularly good at as institutions was recognizing that by, in Britain's case, bringing 100,000 Chinese students over every year to our universities was going to solve the problem rather than exacerbate it. So my shorthand answer to the first question is, whatever strategies we put in place, they have to be sustainable. We have to think about distance research, not as a response to COVID, but as a long-term strategy for university survival and knowledge creation in the globe. So I hope that's sort of given some food for thoughts. And my presentation was throwing out what I was thinking was some of the dangers, the implicit dangers that we will need to address in carrying out that sort of research. But be very interested to hear what my other colleagues in the panel have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that also we can try to address and interact with each other a little bit during our discussions, and the answering of the questions for each speaker. And this will be very good to interact between us too. I think that we have two questions for Professor Matsumai, and I will make all the two of them, both of them. So the first one is, don't you think that only sharing data or methods among researchers without face-to-face is not good enough to truly advance knowledge? This is from Valmor Tricoli from University of São Paulo. The other question is, would you mention an example of how you propose to deal with the cultural differences that affect subjectivity in co-creative processes? This is from Margie Rowing from Unicentro, Paraná.
Thank you for the interest to my presentation and also the very insightful questions. And I'd like to answer first for the first questions. About the first question, I totally agree. That's exactly what I was talking about in my presentation, that mere knowledge transfer or the knowledge exchange is not collaborative. It cannot be said collaborative research. It really requires the knowledge co-creation. And then, as I mentioned in my conclusion, an environment where we cannot meet face-to-face, but it's very difficult, but I don't think not impossible. For knowledge co-creation, one option is to try the challenge of the sharing tacit knowledge, even via online. The tiny challenges presented in my presentation is within that context. First, Ferdi from Indonesia, Quentin from France, and I designed and carried the experiment via online because even they are in Japan, but we are not allowed to meet. Even they have arrived, we are not allowed to meet. So we needed to initiate from by online from the beginning. And also for the examinees in the method C, minimum co-creative process, they have experienced the knowledge co-creation online as confirmed by the facts. I mean, we evaluate the cognitive load and then their shared process and then outcomes. They show the co-creation there. And then another option is the Neville's speech. He also mentioned, but I think that is much more effective, and I think that it's to leverage the co-creative relationships we have already built in the past. And for the second question, for example, the tacit knowledge and the intersubjectivity, which are important elements for the co-creation, tend to better understood in Asia, India, in Japan, or Asian country, but not in the Western world, just the tendency. However, what is the culture? Of course, we understand that there are national religious culture, but the researcher, we also share the same culture and values of being as a researcher, which is a very important foundation for collaborative research. And Padu talked about a lot about it, I think. And for example, from my words, accountability or fairness, transparency, diversity, inclusiveness, respect, and fact-based logical thinking or creative thinking even. And so I think they may not sometimes be shared among the people in the same country, in same religion, but we researchers live in the same culture in this meaning. So in the context of joint research, we have the common funding about that. So that's my answer for the questions.
Thank you. Very interesting answers. Thank you. And it's actually a very challenging process because it's something that we have to build, to construct, to make still. So, and we have to discover a lot of things, including how to be creative in front of a computer after 10, 12 hours a day, how our brains, I'm a neuroscientist, so how our brains can work and can function after after this process. So this is very important to talk and to discuss as well. So my questions for Dr. I'm sorry if I don't say your name very correctly, Dr. Seshaiyer. Is that correct? I've been using the right accent. And we have here, I'm sorry, we have two questions as well. The first one is how the relationship can be improved in such limited social contact imposed by COVID-19 pandemic, and is the mutual cultural knowledge fundamental for successful co-creation? And the other question is three questions actually. Is the mutual cultural knowledge fundamental for successful co-creation? Is from Miriam, from Paulista School of Medicine, Unifesp, from our university, Federal University of São Paulo. So those are very interesting questions as well. Dr. Seshaiyer, please.
Thank you. So if I can start with cultural knowledge sharing, which goes with Akane's question also. I think it's this is something that I've found to be very useful to drive my research because as researchers, I have been trained very traditionally originally. So this means I give problems to students what I want to do. I have learned right now to change that philosophy to you do research in what others want to do. So I think this has really taught me. So when a student approaches me, I now do not say, let's work on this project. I actually say, what do you want to work on? And I noticed that this has completely changed the culture and the way, because most faculty don't want to do that because they only know and they're very good at certain things. And they want to give that to the students. And unfortunately, what you do is you have a select group of students that want to come into you. So if I have to remove this cultural barrier, I realize that I do the exact opposite. Give you an example. 3 years back, I published a paper with a student in how Zika spreads. This is one of the first papers in modeling for Zika, mathematical models. I was sitting in the office finishing up the paper with the student, and the next student came from Puerto Rico. And the student comes from Puerto Rico. They are both sitting in my office, and I introduced the students to each other. And the student asked this other student, what was your research? And the student is saying, I worked on Zika with Dr. Seshaiyer. Here is what we did, blah, 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 and all that stuff. And then just like I'm starting to ask students, like, what do you want to do? And the student from Puerto Rico turns around and says, I want to work on gang violence. I said, what? Gang violence? I said, I'm a mathematician and I'm a scientist. I don't know how to do gang violence. I had no idea, okay, where to start. Most faculty do not want to accept that. It's like, I don't know how to do that. Tell me how many faculty can do that, right? So because of the ego, because of how good we are, we do not want to accept that that aspect. Okay, that's the first thing I culturally went over, is starting to understand that I don't know a lot of things. And so when I present myself to the student, like, tell me more. And the student says, well, my cousin got recruited into gangs last week. Can you help me model that? And I said, give me some time. And I went out of the office to drink coffee, to get coffee. And my intention was to let the two students together. And I came back. When I came back, here's what happened. The student that did Zika, Zika, if you did not know why it is unique from dengue and chikungunya, because dengue and chikungunya and Zika are caused by the same mosquito, Aedes aegypti, but Zika can be also transmitted besides the mosquito through sexual transmission. So you have dengue and Zika that can only be transmitted through a mosquito. You got Zika that can do mosquito and sexual transmission. So I come back into the room and here is what has happened. The Zika student has taught, they have talked together. I come in and say, Dr. Seshaiyer, I think we have figured out how to solve gang violence in Puerto Rico. I said, how did you do it in 5 minutes? And the student says, oh, it's just like Zika. If I'm walking on the street and the gangster is trying to influence me into gangs, that's the mosquito. And then I am inside my own family, my uncle tries to recruit me, that's like sexual transmission. And they figured out together that the Zika research can be translated into research on gang violence. And I said, brilliant. All I had to do from that point is to change my mindset to really teach them how to do research. So culturally, who had to change here? Not the students, I had to change. So I would answer that question as, we all have our egos, we all have our expertise. It's time to cross the border and try to really understand. Don't answer research. Don't use research for answering your questions. Use research for answering other people's questions. And that's how we break the barrier and bring the cultures together. That's the first one. I guess social impact on COVID. I never interacted with social scientists before. Now I'm writing papers with social scientists left and right because they are telling me things that I had no idea about. And when I hear those things, I bring my expertise and say, can I add this as a policy term in my equation? Can I add this term into this thing? So I need their input to tell me what to do. And then I tell them, this is what my simulations are saying. Do you think it makes sense? And then we think about data. So I think this type of marrying completely different fields is, I think, what is going to really define and break, come up with breakthroughs and all that stuff. So yes, totally. Use this opportunity to completely talk to a person that is not in your field. I would say that that's the biggest advice I would give you is, if you're a mathematician, go talk to an artist. Maybe you'll come up with some very good way to think about math and art together to solve a problem for a drug substance abuse. So those are the types of ideas that you want to come up with. So that's what I will say.
That's very good. Thank you so much. This was a great answer because I think this is the way we have to face the moment and to cross the limits, not stay in the same way, the same manner that we were before this pandemic. So of course the researchers will have to make a difference. So we are asked to do that. And I actually wrote what you said: be open to change the mindset. Let's keep with this in mind. This is very good point. And I would take this expression to talk about our universities in Brazil. We have today several people in the audience from our universities. The federal universities in Brazil are 69 universities all over the country. It's a big country, but this network is a very important, and it's showing right now to the society what is the difference that we can make. Since the beginning that the first case in Brazil of the COVID-19, it was in February. Our universities gathered and start working hardly to give answers to the society. We also have 40 hospitals in our system, the 69 universities. We have 40 big hospitals in the whole country. So this was also a way to reorganize our work, and after that, our teaching processes as well. So now in our university, Federal University of São Paulo, it's very focused on the health science. And after 4 months of the pandemia in Brazil, the epidemic in Brazil, we have in our university researchers from all areas gathering to give answers to the society. The health researchers, health science, the basic researchers, all the social researchers, the humanities, the education researchers. We are working together and trying to do a lot of projects, different projects. In only 4 months, we have now 170 projects just in human beings. This is the having the ethical committee analyzed that. And we also have, plus we have the work in experimental science, in social science, in economics, and we have now several researchers working in economics and in the social situation in Brazil, which is very difficult because of the challenge that we have in the society and the equality, the social equalities that we need to talk and we need to face now, or inequalities, let's actually say. And we are actually gathered to give answers to people, to the society, to the governments. And we are doing that in many areas, including the vaccine, including new drugs, including new strategy to talk to the people in the society and to face the problems in the society. But the big challenge that I see right now is how to keep going, because of course in Brazil, we need support from our government, we need financial support, we need financial support from other institutions, and we also need support from the society to keep going, because what I see right now, because the pandemic is too long in our country, I see people very tired, very facing difficult time, not in fighting the COVID-19. Our brave researchers and health employees and people in the health system are doing great work. But what I see right now is how difficult it is to keep going, doing research, having financial support, and also having the strength to keep the strategies to gather our students, to have inclusion of digital work, creative processes. This is what I think is the big challenge for us in our system in Brazil. I think that we are fighting very hard, and we are doing a very good job, all the universities, but we need to keep going. And this is very good to listen to all of you, the experience, different experience, and how we can share experience to continue and to do more to fight the COVID-19 and other things. Dr. Wylie said that we will have a big challenge, all the human beings, because we need to face also the climate changes that maybe COVID-19, we will have a solution in few months, in 1 year, 2 years, but other things related to the climate changes will come, and we will have to give answers to that too as researchers. I have two questions, general questions, after those remarks that I was asked to give also some information about our work and our universities in Brazil. I have two general questions, and then I'll give you to answer, and then I'll ask you to give the final remarks as well. So we are coming to the end of our section, and then I just have to say this was a great section, wonderful to change this experience and to have you here. So the questions are general questions. What the speakers' suggestions, what are the experience suggestions to reduce gender asymmetries in science and internationalization process, taking into account the data presented? This is from Julia Wiggers from Federal University of Pampa, Rio Grande do Sul. And the other question is, can you please share experience of co-creation, natural science research, and how to deal with this environment where we are having difficulties and we are unable to conduct laboratory experiments. So experimental science, how to deal with this situation, since laboratory experiments are, experimental science is pretty much dependent on the presential work. So I give you Dr. Wylie in the same way that we started, and also thank you so much for being here, for sharing your data and work.
Thank you very much. So if I could maybe deal with Julia's question, pregunta, and I'd like to thank her for that. And that was the issue of, how do we deal with gender inequalities and so forth. And the point I suppose I was making in my presentation was that what worries me is that how the gender inequalities are likely to be exacerbated if we don't keep our eye on them. So I think there are probably two answers, or two issues here. The first is that I still think there's a huge amount of work we need to do around changing the way we think about and structure our careers and our expectations around a successful career in academia. So the emphasis on publish and perish, the emphasis on going around the world and giving papers at prestigious conferences. Well, that's very difficult to do if you have childcaring responsibilities. So I think that we need, as senior managers of university, and I suppose I'm looking at Soraya here and myself as rectors and vice rectors, we need to go to our HR, our human resources teams, and really drill down and say, are we equipped to develop the human capacity, the human potential in our institutions? And that, I think, will take imagination. It'll take some structural change. I was thinking about the point that Padu mentioned about being entrepreneurial and our willingness to take on new challenges, to think outside our comfort zones. But the problem with that, and that's why it's so few people, Padu, who are willing to say, I know nothing, I'm prepared to have a go at it, is because we are required to publish, we're required to keep generating this knowledge, and we cannot reinvent ourselves. Well, I think, in order to deal with the challenges, we not only have to reinvent ourselves, but we also have to open doors to other things. Now, as senior managers, we need to know that having diversity of opinions, both gendered and national and cultural, that is the crucible that we need to create in order for those extraordinary ideas to come up. So that's my first thing. It's up to us to change the structure of our institutions. The second thing, though, is I think it is linked to internationalization, because when I think of some of the research that's going on in Stirling, some of it actually linked to UNESP with collaborators there. Some of the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work doesn't appear to be able to be done on campus, but it does work when we reach out and deal with international collaborators. We seem to be able to dismantle those disciplinary boundaries when we reach out to international collaborators. I never forget going to visit Henihashu, the field cruise in Belo Horizonte, and was staggered that there was only one senior professor I met who was male. The rest were all women. Likewise, when I went to Malaysia and saw the powerful position that female academics held as deans and so forth. And frankly, it was only then that I realized just how gendered and blinkered my own UK sector is. And I could have exactly the same conversation about ethnic diversity. We're under the impact of Black Lives Matter here, as I think we all are. You know, we've really realized how traditional our approaches are, and so it's going abroad and seeing and learning from each other about how we can all benefit from this diversity. I think that's the way ahead. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave to the others the natural science question, if I may, because then I'm really out of my depth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Matsumai.
Hi, I'm back. So the two questions about the gender inequality, right? Right. So gender inequality is hard for me to answer because my husband is also the university professor and then always co-creative. But if I could give you the one piece of my advice, please keep the inverted politics models today's presentation in your mind. Actually, keep co-creating and according to the each one's context, and then they keep the co-creativity, because the creativity gives us the solution that cannot be solved without the creativity. So that is my first answer. Please use the IBM for your, and then also about the creating the co-creation experience online is the hardest part, and I think once we get successful for that making the experience, other things and methodology can be applied as usual, I think, for the natural science even. Actually, in our laboratory, we are challenging for that. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very good point. Dr. Seshaiyer, for your final remarks. Thank you.
Unmute. So yeah, so I think the first one is on equity and equality. I think I would suggest that everybody do a homework today, go back and look at the definition of equity and equality, what the differences are. It's very important, number one. You know, one thing we can do is to find role models, and you know, it's very important to understand our own groups and understand, you know, for example, who are doing well, and then actually help them become role models. And I've seen this idea of role modeling becoming a very important and part of the agenda. So, but at the same time, you should not be overusing, you know, people in committees and things like that. So, you know, they need their space. I've seen I can be very frank, just because somebody is underrepresented, they're African American or Hispanic American, they are put on every committee in the university. No, you don't do that. Just to satisfy a requirement in the committee that you have to have a women or a underrepresented, because you're taking away time from their other agenda. So it's very important for administrators to understand, to give them their space. It's super important. On the second part, I think is a very important question, not just in research, but in teaching also. And this relates to what Neville said about money, tuition. So if you think about it, many universities, maybe in the UK too, he talked about bringing students from China. We in the US also bringing students from outside. That's the international students, or even students from another state, from Pennsylvania to Virginia. It's called out of state. What do? We charge them 3 times the tuition. Why do we do that? Because they are getting the experience, right? So they come to the, so I send my daughter from this university, from this state to another state. They get an out of state experience and hence out of state tuition. What did COVID do? We are all internet. Who is out of state? You're in Brazil, I'm in Pennsylvania. It doesn't matter. So why charge that much tuition? So now it's a harder challenge for the administrators. So the question now is, how do we balance this type of thing? And the same thing, because the student can say, I am coming to the university for the lab experience. And if you're not giving me that actual lab experience in your institution, which is well known for neuroscience, then what am I learning from here? So, I think this type of questions are coming from students, parents, and administrators have to really think about creative ways, learning digital technologies, learning management systems. There are so many of them that are very powerful, artificial intelligence based, that can be introduced. So this is where the university need to really think about these resources where you can actually dissect a frog just like you're dissecting in an actual lab and learning. So I think, but it still doesn't answer, can lab experiences change research? Yeah, right now researchers I know that really need that lab space are the ones that were affected the most actually. So I think, so what we are trying to do is in our institution is those that are doing computational research, because when we come back to the university, we don't want everybody to come back. So what we are trying to do is giving space for the lab-based researchers to go in first. We computational researchers stay at home and do our research so that we don't have to go there and also do social distancing and things like that. Give them their space. So then we can do at least small adjustments like that. So that's one answer. So.
Well, thank you so much. Very good answer as well. Let's give space for women, for lab science. And I have to just say one final thing about the gender inequalities. Our university was indicated as the first university in Brazil from Times Higher Education about all the ODGs, the 5, the 10, and some others, but the 5 and the 10 are very important to us, and it's a very important point because we are the first university in Brazil in gender, reducing the gender inequalities. So this is very important. I am very proud, but not only because I am a woman in charge of the university, but we gave a space, our office during this rectory, we gave a space, as you said, to many women that were there, that knew how to do have talents, who have several different talents, and we gave space to them. This, I think, that is a very good answer to many things that we talked today. Thank you so much. This was a great section. I was very happy for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Hosanna, for this great organization. And I give you the final words of our section from the Coimbra Group of Brazilian Universities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rector Soraya, Padu, Dr. Wylie, and Dr. Akane. We have a lot of problems to solve. We have a lot of difficulties to overcome. And we wish to continue working together with all of you. We think that it's the better way, better, more than before. It's a good way for all of us. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rector Soraya. It's really a wonderful section. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both of you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you very
soon.
much.
Thank you very much. Obrigado muito.
Obrigado.
Até logo.
Obrigada.
Bye.
Tchau.